I want you to listen to this. And it has to do, it's a very important message for everybody in that sense.
Six months over that day. They even took her phone away. Okay. She's the first doctor that's effectively canceled by the industrial military complex. The story that I have been trying to tell for a long time is the reason why Robert O. Becker gets canceled by the same group of people. Why? Because he's doing work on non-native EMF electropollution for the US Navy. And the story that people don't really understand is how this ties to the progression that I made in the Danny Jones podcast. This is MK Ultra, graduates to SRI, Stanford Research Institute. Then magically under Obama in 2013, you have the Brain Health Initiative. All of a sudden, everything goes to Central and South America. So I would have thought in some of these podcasts, you know, ones I did with Danny, ones I've done with Adrian D'Amico, ones I did with Bulwark, but the last one, the big one, was when Breedlove came down here for 4 days and interviewed me, told them bits and pieces, and no one's asked me the real question. Why in the fuck did this thing morph? Well, turns out another guy, a part of this program, is a guy named Alan Fry. In the late 60s, he takes the work of Jose Delgado, the guy that everybody knows about the bull and the wires in the head. And then I told Danny at the end of this process, they found out they didn't need wires, they didn't need chips, they could do it with light. And he goes, what? That is the last part of the story that nobody seems to understand. So they begin to realize that they can use light frequencies to destroy the leptin melanocortin pathways in the brain to control people. They don't need LSD. They don't need mescaline. They don't need anything else. Okay. And the reason why this program gets changed is during its evolution, they find out that people that have heavily melanated skin are the most difficult to control. Okay. So there's another DARPA program that you may have heard about. I'm sure Whitney Webb and Mark Godwin have heard about it, but have never linked it to this story. It's called the Targeted Individual Program. In other words, how you control people utilizing remote technology. Well, who's the guy that actually really discovered this whole thing? Alan Fry. Alan Fry's looked at a good guy in my world. Why? He's the first guy that showed that when you zap a brain with any type of electromagnetic radiation, it opens the blood-brain barrier. So you can take bad shit and get it in. What magically happens in the United States at that time? People start making processed food. What also magically happens? Drugs start to come on market, and they have a lot of fillers and preservatives in them. Guess what? All those fillers and preservatives and all the fake processed shit was.
Whoops.
Really?
Guess what the mRNA is?
And the reason why this program gets changed is during its evolution, they find out that people that have heavily melanated skin are the most difficult to control. Okay. So there's another DARPA program that you may have heard about. I'm sure Whitney Webb and Mark Godwin have heard about it, but have never linked it to this story. It's called the Targeted Individual Program.
Listen, I don't know where you're coming up to Canada to hide. You'd have to go up pretty far north, perhaps, to get away from people. It's here in full effect. I can go into deep detail as to how I know that.
In other words, how you control people.
Fuck, they hit me with voice to skull technology on the shores of Lake Huron over the course of 15 years. And I knew what it is, and I know what it is now. Now I know what it is coming from a lot better. The whole bioweapons program, the balloon sats, the satellites, the 5G towers out there, y'all. Your mobile phone. Anything that can propagate an electromagnetic wave.
Utilizing remote
Your earbuds.
technology.
Your printer.
Well, who's the guy that actually really discovered this whole thing? Alan Fry. Alan Fry's looked at a good guy in my world. Why? He's the first guy that showed that when you zap a brain with any type of electromagnetic radiation, it opens the blood-brain barrier. So you can take.
Very important point right here. But you don't come in here proving anything to me. We all know it's there. You know, the whole trap that they want to get you into is whether or not it's real or not. If you know, you know. That's all that really matters in that sense. Now, listen to what he's talking about in this regards.
Bad shit and get it in. What magically happens in the United States at that time? People start making processed food. What also magically happens? Drugs start to come on market, and they have a lot of fillers and preservatives in them. Guess what? All those fillers and preservatives and all the fake processed shit was really about. It was about figuring out how to get toxins from your gut into your brain so that you could electromagnetically target them. That is actually what happens between MK Ultra into SRI. What do they find out in SRI? Where does the program stall? 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. That's magically when Obama says we're going to get rid of incandescent bulbs, we're going to go to LEDs. What do they find out? Because LED bulbs remove UV and red light, have a huge blue spike. It turns out the blue spike can actually be used to control people through the dopamine.
You wonder why I wear these glasses, these blue ray glasses, is because of Dr. Jack Kruse right here. You can go up to X and search him out, follow him. He's a neurosurgeon. Fantastic. And he's not afraid to talk about, well, he's been ostracized by the medical community way back in the 90s because of the things that they couldn't keep him quiet about. Really interesting, dude.
Pathway. How does that work? You go back and listen carefully to what I said to Danny, and he clearly didn't get it, even though he's done podcasts with people that told him this in the past. Dopamine, or I should say melanin, breaks down into dopamine. If you open the blood-brain barrier, dopamine floods the brain and it causes brain damage. Anybody who's a healthcare practitioner, I guarantee you, when Kevin listens to this, he'll understand it, knows that when we use dopamine in an ICU setting, we have to be extremely careful with it, you know, when we're trying to elevate their blood pressure, because a low dose, a medium dose, or high dose can kill you. When people are in the ICU, they're around electromagnetic devices. This is the reason why. Because we're flooding their brain with dopamine, we're flooding their brain with serotonin. There's even something called the serotonin syndrome that y'all can look up and fact check Uncle Jack. This is the key things that Alan Fry finds out for DARPA. And then what does DARPA originally do? Not only are they using directed energy weapons to try to control this, they are now checking this at scale in the United States. So what two things happen at the end of Obama's term that you guys may remember that's tied to this story? There is two things that happen. The first thing is a young African-American attorney who went to Florida State named Myron May goes into the Florida State Library with a gun, shoots the library up, doesn't shoot anybody else. And what does he do? He sends 10 people a package with the story of what I'm telling you right now. And he says, I know they're targeting me, but I don't know why. How did this all start? It's a very interesting story when you delve into it. He's comes from a poor background, had no medical problems. He had a Fitzpatrick score of 4. He wasn't like Nairobi, Kenya, but pretty dark. He starts to date a pediatrician from New Mexico. And magically, after they're dating for a while, he starts to complain of horrible back pain around his kidney and adrenal gland. He starts telling her, I think I need to go to the doctor. She goes, no, just treat it this way, that way. He goes to see a doctor in New Mexico who's a known entity in the DARPA program. He gets prescribed medications for ADHD. The pediatrician goes, why in the hell would they?
Slim, Yeah and no. It becomes your dopamine and serotonin releases become unregulated when you're taking drugs, but you yourself are still producing it. Okay, you can only inject yourself a certain amount from your brain that your brain produces, so you can't really overdose on your brain, but you can enhance it. When you introduce it through an intravenous, it's a whole different ball game, right? But yeah, you're right. You're not too far off. But I should rephrase that. What am I smoking? I just lit one up. What am I smoking, Guido? I had to roll another one back here. It's a I got it's called Wappa. It's an older one called Wappa, and it's quite citrusy. And hold on, my dear, hold on. Yeah, sure. Just one sec. Chair. Yeah, here you go. You have that one. I needed it to kind of get into this conversation. You're telling me Big Mike was a professional football player? I think I heard that too. No wonder. Guy's hung like a horse. The woke ESPN has ran Terry Bradshaw off. Now, really? I haven't watched mainstream, especially football, in quite some time. I just get the highlights on the internet. Well, I love Dr. Jack. The only thing I wish I could change about him a little bit is the fact that he's this Bitcoin maximalist. In that sense, he calls himself a Bitcoin foundationalist. If you search him up on X, that'll be Dr. Jack Kruse. But he shares all kinds of important, relevant medical information about decentralized medicine and other doctors who talk about the same sort of things, that information that suppress in otherwise the mainstream media in that sense. But we'll call it.
They put you on something like this. What happens from there? He goes back to Florida. His behavior becomes more bizarre. He's telling people that he hears voices in his head. He has horrible pain in his chest and he doesn't
Oh, fuck yeah, they're hitting him with the voice to skull.
know why. Ultimately, something happens to him where he figures out that somebody from the outside is actually targeting him for a reason and he doesn't know why. Here's the key part of the story, Marty. Turns out when you have a lot of melanin both inside and outside your body, this direct targeting device is bidirectional. See, when you don't have a lot of melanin, when they shoot it into you, you actually become a zombie, an obedient idiot. But when you're highly melanated, because what does melanin do? It absorbs massive amounts of radiation. For those of you who don't believe this, you can actually go look at the tests that we did on the hydrogen bomb, okay, on the atolls in the South Pacific. You may be shocked to hear this, but when we did that test, the United States military didn't even know what the thermonuclear capability of the bomb was that they were going to set off. Turned out they thought it was going to be about 7.5 megatons. It turned out, reality of the test, it was 15 megatons. That means that the blast area went into areas where regular people from the South Pacific lived. There's pictures that show these people lost their melanin in certain places on their body. You know why? Because that melanin absorbed the radiation blast for them. Okay? That's documented out there. So the government begins to realize that if they're going to use these devices as a weapon of war, that they've got to test it at scale on different folks. Turned out all the stuff that you hear about the TI people that are out there, these are people that are the randomized controlled clinical trial of DARPA on their own people before this weapon is ready for prime time. Just so you know, Marty, you may be asking, well, the Russians had the same technology as us. Why don't we see the same program there? Well, the Russians try to warn us. And this is where Becker's research comes in. Do you know, and you can look this up, there used to be something called the woodpecker frequency that emanted from Ukraine that went all the way around the globe at a specific latitude. This was an EMF device that the Russians put out to warn the United States that if you guys don't change what you're doing in terms of adopting electromagnetic radiation through cell technology, you're going to create a huge problem for people. And then when the United States military didn't listen to them, what did Russia do? This is where the Moscow embassy event happens. Remember, you probably heard as a young man about Havana syndrome, where all these guys in Cuba got zapped, right? You probably don't remember learning anything about what happened in the Moscow embassy. The Russians took a pulse microwave device and pointed it at the US embassy in Moscow from 1967 all the way to 1973. In that time frame, they had more diagnoses of tinnitus, Meniere syndrome, voices, mental illness, but here's the big one. We had 3 straight ambassadors develop blood cancers. Okay? Turns out in 1973, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, has to give hazard pay to anybody who was in the embassy at that time. Do you know how they solved the problem? You want to know where the idea of tinfoil hats came from, my friend? They put tinfoil all up in the US embassy when they found out what the Russians were doing. And what did the Russians tell them? We're trying to warn you that what you're about to do is going to be a big problem. 1973, Marty, guess what else happens in 1973? Becker does the key paper on the sanguine antenna to use RF radiation pulsed to check all the Trident submarines all over. And he finds out through his work that this is a huge problem. So the Secretary of Navy and the other parts of DARPA know that this is a big issue because they're working on both parts of this story. So Becker gets so frustrated from 73 to 77, kind of like Kevin was about his story that you've been documenting with him every time you have him on. And he goes on 60 Minutes and tells the world the truth. Guess what happens to him? He gets fucking Bernice Eddied. Literally, they take all his money away. How do you censor a scientist? You just take their money away. And basically, a guy that's twice nominated for the Nobel Prize for his work in tissue regeneration, utilizing bioelectricity, gets zapped. Why? Also, the government continue this DARPA program that then gets morphed in 2008, first to get rid of incandescents and then to put LEDs, then it gets even more nefarious. Obama says we need to figure out how to get brown people more controlled. So they pick Central and South America. Why? They've got a good mix of Fitzpatrick's 2s, 3s, and 4s. They go down there and they start to perfect the targeting. What are they using to deliver the targets? They're using processed food. They're using jabs. They're using geoengineering. Things fall from the sky. And you may be saying, well, how does this really work, Jack? Like, what's the mechanism
here it is right
that's
here.
tied to it? This is where you don't get any of the Whitney Webb, Mark Godwin people understanding. When you open someone's brain blood barrier and you open up their gut barrier, that means that big toxins, higher atomic mass than a hydrogen proton, goes into places that it's not supposed to be. So, Marty, you're a smart guy. I think you know that Intel and AMD, when they make semiconductors, they have clean rooms, right? They don't want anything in there. Turns out your brain works on the same mechanism. How do we know that? Guess what Becker's work was on? He's the one that proves that our body works by semiconduction. They already took his research out. So what did the government do? They take high atomic mass elements and deliver them in ways that you can't imagine. How does this work, Marty? You have places in your body called the circumventricular organs. And remember, I'm a Bitcoiner, but what's my day job? I'm a brain surgeon. So I know a little bit something about the brain. The circumventricular organs sit around your hypothalamus and your thalamus. These are areas where you never have a blood-brain barrier. These become the target of DARPA. They start to deliver these things. Do you want to know why geoengineering really is a problem? Not only does it block the sun, but when this shit falls down in the ground, those elements wind up going through places where you don't have a blood-brain barrier. And if they can convince you to use those earphones that Apple sells, then they can really get you.
Yeah, is it pumping a scare into you yet? Now, we'll get back to Stacey Wander here. I had to take a little side journey. Whoops. So Stacy Wandra and his